Hello and welcome to EDH Rec's Upping the Average, where we take a commander's average deck list as compiled by the data on EDH Rec and make some quick swaps to it to help take it from a good start to a great one. This week the commander we're discussing will help take us to Affinity and beyond. Urza Chief Artificer is kind of a bonkers card. Affinity for artifact creatures, so you rarely have to pay full cost or even commander tax for this guy, because he also makes construct tokens that get progressively bigger, and he gives them menace while he's in play? Yeah, this slaps. His EDH Rec page shows us plenty of excellent goodies from his original precon, which was awesome, by the way. That deck was way good right out of the box. And we've also got some classic Esper artifact staples showing up on the page here too. But surely there's more that we can accomplish. So let's grab his average deck list from the average deck feature and import it to the Architect deck building website. As always in this series, any swaps we make must either keep the total price of the list cost neutral or else help lower the overall cost of the deck. Esper artifact decks have been a thing for a while, since way back in Alara, but I quite enjoy the way this new version of Urza gives this archetype a simple shakeup. Where Sharoom and Sidri decks occasionally wandered into combo territory, this new Urza simply wants to bash face. No need for intricate tricks and difficult combos. This is a straightforward strategy that uses just the sheer number of metallic things you control to advance its plan forward and pummel enemy life totals. This is Esper Artifacts aggro. It's weird to say, but this kind of direct and uncomplicated win condition feels very refreshing for the artifact archetype. We can leave all that combo stuff to Brea and Joyra and all of those other folks. We're just here to make big robots. Before we can get cutting, though, we have to get acquainted with Urza's MVP cards. Obviously, we like playing and making artifact creatures, be they Thopters, Servos, Mir, or Mana Dorks. I'm especially fond of the Sphinx. What a fantastic card. Plenty of other cards also show up here that mimic our construct tokens abilities, or which help us make even more of those construct tokens. I think when looking at these cards, it seems kind of like academically you sort of understand what should happen, but actually facing down against them in game is a whole new type of fear. Opponents really get caught off guard by just how aggro this deck can really be. It gets out of hand very, very quickly, especially since they're all buffed by all of our mana rocks, our artifact lands, and just random little helpers here and there. Some of our board wipes even manage to be one-sided by destroying only non-artifact creatures, and that helps us either catch back up or clear the way for lethal swing. So, those are some of the basics, but now how do we go about upgrading this list? We'll have two sections for this video. First will be some standard swap outs, but then we'll also have a budget version at the end of the video. One of the things I felt this deck needed just a little more help with was its card advantage. I mean, this deck kind of, in some ways, has more in common with a typical creature aggro strategy than it does with a typical artifact strategy. This deck really wants us to commit a bunch of creatures to the board. That helps make our commander cheaper to play, and it pumps up all of our constructs, for instance. And as a result of that, being super creature-centric means that simple stuff like removal and board wipes can really clobber our entire strategy. So slightly better card advantage or card selection will help us establish more of that early game momentum, and also, more importantly, can help us claw back into the game after any potential setbacks. Of course, to make room for anything, we need to make some cuts. I'll start by striking out this tempered steel here. Yeah, pumping up our metal creatures is nice, but just having artifacts in play at all would pump up our constructs, and we already have other pump effects in the deck that are more valuable or more flexible than this. Artifact decks need to strike a very careful balance between the artifact helper cards and the actual artifact cards, and I don't think this one winds up as useful to us as a regular artifact would be. Traversing now through the creature loadout, I'm really impressed by a lot of what we see here. Nice payoffs, cool tricks, and I like the protective cards especially. But I didn't particularly love Vidalcan Humiliator. I feel bad because I want to like this card so much, and I think it actually could be pretty awesome in other places, but ultimately in this deck, when this thing shone in gameplay, it was because things were already going well, and frankly I thought that other cards could press that advantageous position better than this one did. The next cut, I have to admit, is largely fueled by its price tag. Lita, you're cool and all, but $30 for an untap effect? And we only have like one artifact creature in this deck that even has a tap ability that we would use multiple times, so most often Lita is just giving the metal team vigilance? I don't like that. I don't like that. Not for $30. We can put our money elsewhere. Okay, I know we've only done cuts so far, but here are two more things that struck me as complicatedly lackluster. Thop Shop and the Mightstone and Weakstone. Thopter Shop is kind of an insurance for our stuff dying, but the once per turn trigger just really bugged me, and I know that blue has better ways to draw cards than this thing. Also, I don't know about you, but I just never found the 3-mana activated ability on this to be that useful anyway. Meanwhile, the Mightstone and Weakstone cut requires a caveat. If you are playing Urza Lord Protector in this deck, then hell yeah, go for it. Keep this card. Melding those two cards is awesome. Go off. The only problem is that this here average deck doesn't contain the Lord Protector card. As it turns out, both of these two cards each appear in 33% of Urza Chief Artificer decks. And when I used some of the advanced filters on EDHREC to only look at deck data where the deck contains one of these cards, the other was present in those same deck lists over 90% of the time. And when I use the advanced filters to only see deck data for decks that didn't contain one of these cards, well, the other would also end up absent from that page. In other words, these cards are pretty dependent upon each other to be in the deck list. But the reason that only one of them, the stones, showed up in this average list is because there happened to be more creatures budging Urza downward on the page than there were regular artifacts budging the stones down on the page. Remember, an average is just an average, and we shouldn't ever look at data on EDHREC uncritically. Finding these types of connections is way more important to inform us about how our deck building can improve. The stones without the Lord, or vice versa, just don't make a ton of sense. Play both, or play none. And since the Lord guy is like 20-something bucks right now, I'm not gonna just wantonly toss him in, you know? So anyway, big ramble, but that's why I'm cutting the stones, and also the Thop Shop. We have better mana sources, better removal options, better creature production, and better card draw options than these. In fact, let's get to some of that card draw now. These spells probably look a little simple, but holy crap, they're just cool. The new Forging the Anchor spell is legitimately impressive to me. It can even draw us more lands, you know? This deck is made out of minimum 40% artifacts, even sometimes over 50% depending on how you build it. So we're likely to average a minimum of 2 cards off of this thing, and sometimes I've seen it straight up hit 3 or 4. Way cool. And related to this is Reality Heist, which again, probably looks kind of meh, but it's practically always 2 mana to cast. It's a metallic version of Dig Through Time, you know? I'm just really impressed by how well these 2 cards grease the wheels of this deck. I know they look kind of whatever, but actually casting them always felt way good to me. After that, I gotta say, Research Thief also really impressed me. It probably looks clumsy, 5 mana for this effect, really? But if we're playing Thopter Spy Network and Bident of Thassa already, and we're in a strategy that explicitly says it cares about artifact creatures, and this is an artifact creature, and it draws us cards for each damage proc, not just if 1 or more creatures hit an opponent, then yeah, this card is straight up gas. I have some other goodies that I'm really excited to add, but before I get to them, I'm going to make one more unrelated cut. Vindicate is Vindicute, but sorcery speed for pinpoint removal on just 1 permanent is a tough sell for me these days. I hope you'll indulge me as I add in just one other completely silly thing, just a totally nonchalant Phyrexian Scriptures. Turn our commander, or our Padim, or Shimmer Dragon, or whatever, into an artifact, and then next turn, wipe out all non-artifact creatures. Oh, and also bonus Graveyard Exile, because, you know, why not? This is yet another one-sided board wipe that we can use to obliterate our enemies, and it even lets us keep one of our helpers around in the process. That's brilliant. I kinda can't help myself on these last 2. I know it's not everyone's jam, but y'all, I just love access denied here. Like, a lot. Counter a spell, make a couple Thopters. Like, yes, I know, 5 mana is a lot to hold up, but I feel especially jazzed by this card in this deck because of how it makes our commander's Affinity for Artifact Creatures effect just sing. And since the tokens are artifacts, our constructs will be enormous. And just think of all the damage procs we'd be getting from the Sphinx, or from the Thief, or from the Network, or from the Bident of Thassa, or all the tapping we can do with the Shimmer Dragon, or how these are skull clampable, or okay, I'm getting carried away. The point is, if any deck is built to abuse access denied, it's this one. And lastly, here's my absolute favorite card to add to this Urza deck, Masterful Replication. Technically, this is a modal spell, but I'm never using it to make the 3/3s. I'm using it to turn every artifact we control into a construct that will swing for uber mega lethal, or to turn them all into Masters of Ethereum, Bronze Guardians, whatever. Like, can you imagine how many tokens we'll make off of turning everything into a Sphinx? This can turn our mana rocks and lands into lethal threats. Or since it's an instant, we could actually even use this to save our big board. Did someone play a board wipe? Well, swoop, now all our artifact creatures are Darksteel Citadels, safe for the turn. This card has some nasty capabilities for this Urza deck, and I highly, highly recommend giving it a shot. Now, before we head to the budget version, let's go through some honorable mentions. If Lightning Greaves wasn't like $10 right now, I'd have slotted that card in ASAP to help keep our commander alive for longer. I also find that Treasure Vault and Magnificent Gardens would be great additions for the mana base. One of them is an artifact land, which will help tick up the artifact count just slightly, but in a way that definitely matters, and the other will copy a random artifact in case we ever need it, which can yield really cool surprise results. Speaking of copies, I also absolutely adore Phyrexian Metamorph for artifact decks. If you can snag this one, its flexibility is just impossible to beat. And of course, consider some splashy counterspells for this deck too. This is an aggro deck, and helping to keep the board protected will keep the bash going and going and going. Okie doke, those are the official swaps. You can find this version of the deck list below, but we're not quite done yet. Let's also give this deck a very quick budget makeover. Initially, when I was planning this whole video out, I thought that this budget section would be like really long, but it's really not going to be. This section will be very refreshingly short because, as it turns out, it takes very little for this commander to become super budget friendly, which is pretty darn awesome. There are like 6 lands that make up the bulk of the price here, and just like yoink them out. We'll be fine. We'll use some classic budget standby cards, and we really won't be too bothered by their absence. And after that, there are only like about 5 other expensive non-land cards driving up the majority of the rest of the price. Teferi's Protection, Smothering Tithe, those sorts of things. I do think the thing that hurts the most is losing the Tezzeret, since that's a very uniquely good card for this strategy, but okay, so what? We'll still live without these. Let's find some quick replacements for all those cards. First, in lieu of a Teferi's Protection, I find the simple Rootborn Defenses to be a perfectly fine card. Prevent some destruction, then populate for another construct? Cool, let's do it. The next editions will probably look really lame, but we lost some cards that have mana production, so let's get the Mirror in here. They're artifact creatures that tap for mana, which means we can power out Urza, like, immediately. I am totally game for that. We might be on a budget, but we can still get the beatdowns started ASAP. And finally, I know we can't have the Tezzeret, but we can have this new Monumental Corruption card. Either we draw some cards and lose life, or more likely, we'll just use this to dome an opponent for like 10 or 13. Like seriously, almost every time I saw Tezzeret, it would deal lethal damage off of a single activation, and we can pull off a similar effect here whenever we need just a little more oomph to go over the top of an opponent hiding behind a very effective pillow fort. And with just a couple of swaps, we've drastically lowered the price. We don't need to be too complicated and combo-tastic about this kind of thing. Just like this deck strategy, we are straightforward here. You can find both versions of the deck down in the description box below, with their cuts in the maybe board. I hope you've enjoyed this time with the Chief Artificer, and if you have any recommendations that you'd like to make for your fellow Urza players out there, well, first, make sure you clarify which version of Urza you're talking about, because there's a whole bunch of different variations of him out there. But leave those suggestions down in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching.